The stories shared on It Takes Balls are unique to the individual sharing. Always speak with your trusted medical provider for treatment options specific to you. Welcome back to It Takes Balls, presented by Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. Today I'm joined by Monica Bryant. She's a cancer rights attorney with Triage Cancer, and she is the Chief Mission Officer for Triage Cancer. Monica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, this is a young man's disease. Testicular cancer is. A lot of times, we're not thinking about all these insurance and financial and disability things. So I want to start off, let's talk about what short-term disability is versus long-term disability.
Sure. So in a situation when someone needs to take time off from work due to their medical condition, they're not, generally speaking, going to be getting a paycheck for that time frame. So they might have access to maybe some sick time or other paid time off, but if they need extensive time off, they're probably not getting that paycheck that they're used to. And so disability insurance is a cash benefit that someone can access to replace that lost income. There are different sources of disability insurance. So someone could go out and buy a policy themselves. They could get it through their job. Some states have state disability insurance, and then there are 2 federal programs. The distinction between short and long term is about the length of time that the policy will pay somebody out. And if it's a policy that they've bought themselves or one that they've gotten through work, the details of exactly what short term is versus what's long term are going to be written into that policy.
Does it vary? So it sounds like it varies by employer, maybe by state.
It could. So, for example, if someone has a policy that they got through their job, that policy might be a short-term policy that lasts up to 6 months. So they'll give you cash benefits for up to 6 months. Long-term policies are usually after someone has had the diagnosis and been unable to work for a year or longer. So it's definitely going to vary from policy to policy. The state disability insurance programs are generally up to a year. They, again, all differ. And then the 2 federal programs are long-term programs. And so someone has to have the disability or is expected to have the disability for a year or longer.
Okay. So Social Security disability is another one that somebody had asked about. How does that play into those 2?
So Social Security disability insurance is one of those 2 federal programs. It's run through the Social Security Administration. The alternative run through the Social Security Administration is called supplemental security income. Both, again, are long-term programs, but they differ in a couple of important ways. For SSDI, eligibility is based on actually having worked and paid into the system. So it's almost like accessing your retirement benefits early in a way because you have this disability. Whereas SSI is based on having a low income and a low resource level.
Okay, interesting. All right, and then the other one I want to talk about is FMLA, or the Family Medical Leave Act. Is that right?
Yes. So FMLA is a federal law that entitles certain individuals to job-protected time off. And the interesting thing is a lot of people that we will talk to will say, oh, I'm going out on disability. But that's not really a thing. As we just talked about, disability insurance is about replacing lost income. Nothing about a disability insurance policy protects someone's job. It's the FMLA or other laws that are going to protect someone's job. And so we often at Triage Cancer talk about puzzle pieces. Everybody has different puzzle pieces, and those puzzle pieces could be state laws or federal laws or insurance policies or what they have access to at work. And so at Triage Cancer, we try really hard to provide education so that people can understand what their different puzzle pieces are, but then also how they fit together. And this FMLA plus disability insurance, I think, is a great example of those puzzle pieces coming together.
Interesting. Okay. I'm thinking back. So I'm almost 6 years out, but I'm trying to remember. In my case, I think I had short-term disability from my orchiectomy, or the removal of the testicle. I think I had started FMLA at the same time, which I think covered me for extended amount of time. And then I feel like I went on long-term disability when I had my larger abdominal surgery in November. So it sounds like they can kind of fit together, like you're talking the puzzle piece.
Exactly. So FMLA provides 12 weeks of job protected leave. Now, let's say someone's in a situation where they've exhausted their 12 weeks, but maybe they need a couple more weeks out for recovery. Then they might actually be able to ask for something called a reasonable accommodation, which is another benefit under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And so a reasonable accommodation can be all sorts of things, but job protected leave could be one. And so again, now you're layering on FMLA for 12 weeks, reasonable accommodation through the ADA for maybe some additional weeks, and then on top of all of that is potentially disability insurance benefits to make up for that paycheck you're not getting, because FMLA leave is unpaid leave. So most of us can't go 12 weeks without any sort of paycheck, and that's where disability insurance can be incredibly helpful.
Gotcha. Okay. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't know, but is FMLA, is it 12 consecutive weeks, or can it be taken over a year? I think you said earlier, maybe.
Both.
Okay.
So the law allows for up to 12 weeks per year. Now that 12 weeks can be a chunk of time, so all 12 weeks at once. It could be in smaller chunks of time. So as you said, you had one surgery, you needed X amount of time. Then you went back to work, and then you had another surgery, you needed Y amount of time, up to the 12 weeks. So you can take it in those segments. You can also take it intermittently, which means that you have the approval to take FMLA for days you're not feeling well, or when you have follow-up appointments. And so that's going to be a more sporadic or intermittent way to take FMLA, and essentially it's broken down by hours. So I always think of it as your FMLA bank. So if you take 8 hours of FMLA leave, you now deduct 8 hours from your bank.
So when you say 12 weeks a year, is that January 1st to December 31st, or is it the year starting on the date that you take it?
Fantastic question, and it could be either. So the law actually lays out a couple different ways. So it could be a calendar year, it could be a year rolling forward from when you ask for it, a year rolling backwards from when you last ended, or the law says any other fixed 12-month period. So the employer gets to decide. So they might say fiscal year, for example. The employer does have to decide what their year period is going to be and then apply it the same to everybody across the board. And I will tell you, when people come to us and they're saying, my FMLA is about to run out, what do I do? Our very first question is, what's your year period? Because if it's December and they have a calendar year period, maybe it's not going to be an issue because it's going to start over January 1st. Maybe it will be an issue, and then we look to alternatives for where you can find other job protected leave, like the reasonable accommodation we were just talking about.
So if somebody had an advanced case of testicular cancer and they, did chemo right away, they were out for 12 weeks, and then 6 months later, they have a recurrence, and then they have to have the retroperitoneal lymph node dissection, and, that takes another 12 weeks of recovery or whatever the doctor may recommend. How does that work if you need more than the allotted time?
Well, it depends on your period. So if you're still within your year period and you've exhausted your FMLA, then we have to look to see if there are other puzzle pieces you have access to. So can you ask for a reasonable accommodation? Is 12 weeks off reasonable? Maybe, maybe not. It's going to really depend on the situation, the person's job, lots of other things potentially to decide if something is reasonable or not. I will tell you, it's a question we get a lot. Like, can I be let go because of my cancer? And the answer is no. You can't be let go because of your cancer, but you could be let go if you can't go to work and you don't have access to job protected leave.
And how do you, I know we don't want to talk too much about litigation specifically, but if you were going to take somebody, in a suit, how do you determine if it was one way or the other?
Well, again, it's all going to be fact specific, because if someone comes to me and says, I've already exhausted my FMLA and now I need another 12 weeks, and my employer's saying no and they're going to let me go, that's, in fact, potentially okay. I mean, not okay for the person, obviously, but it's not necessarily that the employer is doing something inappropriate. And a lot of what we do at Triage Cancer is we have to speak in conditional language, because first, we're only getting one side of the story. Second, our society is in fact based on laws, and all of these laws are a balancing act between interests, between the interests of the employee and the interests of the employer. And it is sometimes unfortunate in a situation like that where the employer may need the employee to be at work. And if that employee can't be at work and doesn't have access to some other form of job protected leave, the employer can let them go.
So can FMLA also apply to the caregiver?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. So the FMLA applies to individuals to take time off for their own serious medical condition, or for someone to take time off to care for a seriously ill child, parent, or spouse. So that is a very narrow definition of family. And I think for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily meet their needs. So that means that someone couldn't take time off to care for their sibling, or an aunt, or a grandparent, or, an aunt couldn't take time off to care for a nephew. And sometimes those kinds of arrangements are, in fact, make the most sense for families. And unfortunately, the FMLA doesn't allow for that. Now, there are state laws that might provide job protected leave. Every state is a little bit different. And so on triagecancer.org, we actually have charts of state laws on a variety of topics, including taking time off. So if a listener would like to go and see what's available in their state at the state level, that's one place they can do it.
What about when seeking employment? I have a job now, but when I was looking for it, my mom would tell me, don't put that you had cancer or anything, because they might discriminate against you, and maybe that's legal, maybe that's not legal, whatever. But is it the case that, putting down that you've had a disability on this optional form could, eliminate you from consideration?
Anything is possible, right? And to your point, even if it's not permissible under the law, how does someone prove that the reason they didn't get the job was because of something, a specific piece of information? That's pretty hard to prove. Disclosure and privacy is something we actually spent a lot of time talking about at Triage Cancer because it's such a personal choice. And particularly in communities where the diagnoses happen earlier in life, that decision could follow you for decades to come if you are public about your diagnosis. Now, that's not to say that's good or that's bad. It's more about making sure that before someone discloses, they've really thought through all the ramifications. And certainly that could be the ramifications at work, but also, if someone posts on social media, that's public. If someone starts a GoFundMe campaign, that's Googleable. And the internet is forever, and so even if someone thinks right now, well, my being able to pay my bills through a GoFundMe is more important than keeping my diagnosis private, are you going to feel that way in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years? This concept of disclosure also comes up around relationships and dating. So we've heard from a number of people in the AYA community of, I put it out there at the time. It was a source of support. I wasn't trying to hide things, but now I'm sort of through it. And the first thing that people know on a first date is about my diagnosis because I was public about it. And that's a lot of information for someone to have when you sit down at the bar, right? And so this concept of disclosure comes up in areas. I think for the employment piece, it's a little bit about once someone's thought through, are they going to disclose or not? But then it's about when. Is doing it on the application where there's no opportunity for a dialogue the best place to put that? Maybe, maybe not. I would also say, why does someone want to disclose, right? Is it because they feel like not disclosing is somehow lying by omission? Is it they think they have to? Because the thing about it is really our employers or potential employers aren't generally entitled to information about our medical condition. So again, super personal choice. I think that on those, you mentioned those disclosures, it's very common for employers to ask, gender, ethnicity, race, veteran status, sometimes disability status. All of those questions are voluntary. So our suggestion to someone is if they're not going to disclose their disability status, they should probably prefer not to answer all of those questions. Because if they're okay with telling you gender, ethnicity, race, and then they prefer not to disclose the disability status, that is giving some information to the potential employer.
Interesting. And I hate that, and I wish it wasn't the case, but I guess from their side, it's a liability as well, because they're looking at potentially having somebody out of work or insurance premiums going up or something.
There are lots of reasons that employers ask those questions. In fact, there are a number of employers who have an employer policy where they want a certain percentage of their workforce to be individuals living with disabilities or veterans. And so it's not always nefarious in asking it, those demographic questions. Sometimes it really is just about information gathering. But for someone who is concerned about the potentials of being treated differently because of that information, you have that option to prefer not to share.
Interesting. Okay. I want to move into insurance. We've talked a lot about people who are employed. So I know through work, you can get an HMO or a PPO and maybe some other ones. What are the differences between those?
So not just through work. So with all of our different health insurance options, there's going to be potentially differences within what's called managed care. So in the United States, we have two payment systems. One is fee for service. You go to a provider, you pay a fee, they give you the treatment, whatever. Another type is called managed care, which is where you have a network of providers. And if you stay within that network, the insurance is going to cover a higher percentage of your medical costs. Within managed care, there are different options, and it's this alphabet soup of HMOs and PPOs and EPOs. And really the differences at their core are about network size and about if you can go outside of that network for care. So HMOs are health maintenance organizations. Those are going to have the smallest network of providers, and usually HMOs have no out-of-network coverage. So if you need to see someone outside of that network, like a specialist, for example, they're not covering any of it. The other thing about HMOs is that they require that all of your care starts with a primary care physician. So you have a rash, you go to your primary care physician's like, I don't know what that is, go see a dermatologist, and you get a referral out to a dermatologist. But that primary care physician's the gatekeeper. Everything starts with them. So there's some more hoops to jump through to access specialty care, and there's that smaller network of providers. In exchange, you're going to pay the least to have HMOs. The other side of the spectrum are preferred provider organizations, or PPOs. These are going to have the biggest networks, sometimes even across hospital systems. You don't have to start with a primary care physician. Most PPOs have some out-of-network coverage. So if you go in-network, maybe they'll cover 90%. If you go out-of-network, they're only going to cover 50%. But they'll cover something. So more choice, more flexibility with PPOs. You're going to pay more for PPOs. And then there's lots of hybrids of the two in between. And usually someone will go, well, which is better? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on where you live and what your needs are. Because if someone has a serious medical diagnosis and they might see specialists across different hospital systems, an HMO is not the right choice for them.
Gotcha. So I know that for me, in Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation, we always talk about going to a high volume center for an RPL&D because these are the surgeons who are most experienced. Now like I said, I'm 6 years clean. I'm hoping I don't have a recurrence or anything, but I have opted to do the PPO so that if I need to go back to Indiana University to see Dr. Clint Carey again from Virginia, I can go. And I don't want to admit to a crime here, So I won't say who did this, but somebody that I'm aware of had testicular cancer. They were on their parents' insurance. The mom was working part-time, was on the dad's insurance. The mom switched to full-time and then got a PPO before the surgery. So I don't know, like, is that if somebody needs to go to a specialist, like, I don't know. I don't even know what my question is, but I don't know.
First of all, I'm not sure where the crime would be. That seems like really smart navigating the options that family had. As long as going to full-time was a qualifying event to access her health insurance and there was dependent coverage, it actually just that's a very smart way to handle that situation. And there are lots of people who have dual coverage. So whether it's, through your job and a parent's job or your job and a spouse's job, there's nothing wrong with having dual coverage. And the two policies there's lots of rules that I won't get into about who's the primary payer and who's the secondary payer. But honestly, that's a lot of what we do at Triage Cancer. When someone comes to us and says, I need to go see this specialist, but I can't through my insurance, what are my options? We will go through all the different options to see if there is a way to get someone either different insurance, an exception to the network because maybe their network doesn't have a surgeon with the right specialty. It's really about trying to obviously stay within the laws and the rules, but to make sure people understand all their different options because they might have multiple options.
All right. Well, if there's no crime, shout out to my mom. But okay, so you mentioned like an exception. So again, with these high volume centers, in some cases, I guess maybe it would be cheaper in the long run to have the care done by somebody who is experienced in that. So how do you go about getting those exceptions if you're the patient?
Well, again, it's going to depend on a number of factors. The way the rules very generally work is if there isn't a provider of the specialty that somebody needs within the network, then there needs to be the ability to go out of the network and have that out-of-network provider be treated as if they were in-network. And so it's a type of appeal, essentially, where you're going to the insurance company and saying, will you cover this provider as if they were in-network? And then it's a negotiation. So, again, lots of factors here. I think it would have to probably be a very complex case, and there'd have to be a lot of evidence showing that there really were no in-network providers available. But the way you can avoid that challenge?
Oh.
Sign up for a PPO. And I'm saying that somewhat jokingly, but that is the post-Affordable Care Act, where now people cannot be discriminated against based on their pre-existing condition and health insurance. Every single year, we get to make choices for the year ahead. And we can make different choices come open enrollment for next year. And even someone who maybe, is clear at the moment, that's the whole point about insurance. We have no idea what's going to happen to us next year. I could walk outside and get hit by a trash truck and need emergency surgery. And that's really the idea, is that especially in the AYA community, oftentimes because of cost, which is totally understandable, people opt for the least expensive option on the front end, which is the monthly premium. And they don't always think about how expensive is it going to be on the back end should something happen to me and my plan isn't adequate.
Yeah, and not just kind of the cheapest option, but one of our board members, Dr. Phil Perazio at University of Pennsylvania, really wants us to do like a campaign at some point about being insured altogether, because I guess they run into a lot of people who are uninsured.
Yes, it is still a problem. We certainly saw health insurance rates go down after the Affordable Care Act. And then even post-COVID, because there were a couple of different pieces of legislation that added financial assistance to buy plans in the marketplace, we saw the uninsured rate go down even further. Unfortunately, that extra financial assistance sunsets December 31st, 2025. So people are going to see their premiums go up significantly, which for a lot of people is going to mean they're going to drop their insurance. So I think it is a great idea to do a campaign. let us know how we can help. We certainly have tons of resources to help people figure out what their options are and how to make choices between those plans, because being uninsured isn't just about how am I going to pay for the treatment. It also impacts if people are getting diagnosed in the first place.
Yeah. And piggybacking from the uninsured, I want to talk about finances. Now, somebody listening to this podcast is probably already diagnosed, but how do you manage your finances throughout treatment? And, if you are uninsured or if you can't pay, how do you go about kind of taking these huge costs and chunking away at them?
Again, it's going to depend on a lot of circumstances. I would say, if someone is uninsured, number one thing that I would try to figure out if I was talking to them is, how do we get you insurance? And is that around, are you under 26? Can you get back on your parents' plan? Are you Medicaid eligible in your state? Is that a possibility for you? Maybe you were offered health insurance through your job and never took it because you're like, it's too expensive, I don't need it. Can you access it now? So that's sort of step number one. But even someone with health insurance is still going to have medical bills and they're still going to have expenses. So then it's about understanding what's your out-of-pocket maximum? Do you even understand that? Are there sources, are you being billed correctly? Sometimes we hear from people in the cancer community especially that when someone approaches them with financial challenges, step number one is to look for financial assistance, which financial assistance is important and definitely serves a need, but there is not enough of it to go around. It is limited. And so we want to try to, figure out all the other options first and then have someone potentially tap into financial assistance, because that's just a Band-Aid. It's going to solve a problem, a one-time problem typically, whereas if we can make sure someone gets health insurance and they understand their out-of-pocket maximums and they're going to in-network providers, maybe we can keep those costs down. I'd also say that if it's care that someone received in a nonprofit hospital, those nonprofit hospitals are required to provide charity care. That's not always something that is advertised. And so people have to know about it and go and ask for it. And how to, what are the eligibility requirements? How do I apply for it in order to access it? And I hope you don't mind, but I'm just going to shout out one of our great partners, $4. They are a partner nonprofit of ours, and their whole mission is to help people access charity care. So if you apply with $4 and you give them the information about your medical bills, they will help you figure out if you should be eligible for charity care.
Nice. Does it ever subsidize the cost, or is it all or nothing?
It really depends. Oftentimes it is sort of a all or nothing situation, but not always. I'd also say that for someone who has a high medical bill and maybe has insurance and maybe doesn't qualify for charity care, negotiate. Have conversations with the providers. Let them know that you're having trouble paying for it. It's certainly nothing to be ashamed about. But healthcare in this country is astronomically expensive. And so asking for more time or a payment plan, sometimes providers will write off a certain portion of the bill in exchange for a lump sum. So I can't pay you $10,000, but I can pay you $5,000 right now if you write off the rest of it. So just like we would negotiate at a car dealership, right? The same idea can be applied with healthcare professionals as well.
And is it beneficial to ask for an itemized list? Because I know, I've seen on, a $50 Tylenol, that's not what a Tylenol costs.
It is really helpful to get an itemized list for a couple reasons. First, you can make sure that you're only being billed for things you actually get. And stuff like this happens all the time. I had a personal experience with this. I got a bill from an ENT. And I'm like, I don't even know what this thing is, but it says scope. I'm like, I didn't get a scope. Called the doctor's office and the biller was like, no, the doctor gave you this. And I said, explain to me what this is. And she's like, well, they put a camera up your nose. I said, I am quite certain I would have remembered a camera being inserted through my nose. She's like, well, hold on, let me go back and read the doctor's notes. And she did, and she's like, Turns out you didn't get a scope. I'm aware. But had it not been itemized, I would have just assumed that, that $200 was what I owed them. And so I will say, for someone who's had a lot of medical procedures in a short period of time or has had a hospital stay, sometimes you're getting things and you don't even realize what it is you're getting. But still asking questions. What is this code? What is this procedure? Did I in fact get this? Mistakes happen all the time. And so getting that itemized bill and actually comparing it with the explanation of benefits to make sure that everything matches and it actually looks correct can save quite a bit of money.
That's great. I want to move on to estate planning. We mentioned before we started this, I was like, well, a lot of times we don't really need that with testicular cancer because it is so survivable, but unfortunately there are cases. And you said, no, everybody over 18 needs to have an estate plan.
That is my opinion, absolutely. But the thing about it is estate planning is not end of life planning. Estate planning is planning, not for something that's necessarily going to happen in the immediate. But one thing is true for each and every one of us. At some point, we are all going to die. Certainly, we hope that is a long time in the future, but it's going to happen to all of us. So the planning ahead is about the what ifs. And as I mentioned, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I could walk outside and get hit by a trash truck today. The planning, again, is about thinking through wishes, not only for when somebody passes away, but also for their finances and medical care if they're ever in a place where they can't make those decisions for themselves. So I get in an accident and I'm in a coma, who's going to pay my mortgage? Who's going to make medical decisions on my behalf because I can't make those medical decisions? And I firmly believe that everyone over the age of 18 needs to have at least 3 documents. A will, which deals with property, a power of attorney for finances, which deals with finances if you're incapacitated, so you can't make decisions for yourself, and an advanced healthcare directive, which is about medical decisions. And all of those documents can be revoked, they can be changed, you can have, over your lifespan, there is an unlimited number of times that you can redo these documents. And so it shouldn't be something that only gets talked about when someone is closer to the end of life than not.
Does it have to be through a lawyer? Because again, we're talking about guys who are like, finances are tight, or can you just write it on a piece of paper? And I remember like when I was younger, my parents, when we'd go on vacation, I don't know what they were afraid of happening, maybe a plane crash, but they would write a note like, if something happens, blah, 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 whatever. So can you just write it on a piece of paper?
In some states, maybe. That's probably not the most advisable thing. But to answer your first question, no, you absolutely do not need a lawyer. And particularly for younger people who maybe have, limited assets, even if they own a home, it's one home, right? It's not super complicated. There are free options. So freewill.com is a free option to write your will. There are some that are very low cost. Triage Cancer has a partnership with an entity called Good Trust, so you can get a will done. Actually, you can get all your estate planning documents done for like $159. And so there are very affordable ways. We also have a estate planning toolkit at Triage Cancer that's totally free. You go to the website, you click on your state, and you can download not only descriptions of what the different documents are and who might need them. You can see the rules in your state because every state has slightly different rules. And then there are forms that you can fill out. And then basically you get them witnessed. Witnesses can be anybody, like the mailman, your neighbor. Like as long as they're not in your will, they can witness your will. And so it is a huge misconception that you need to have a lawyer or that it is costly to create these documents. It does not have to be.
What if their name is Will?
That's fine.
I'm kidding. As we come down the home stretch here, there's 2 things I want to talk about that we're not going to get too detailed in because it's litigious things, but we just want an overall look at these things. A lot of us who are testicular cancer survivors and patients are getting these ads on Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and everywhere about class action lawsuits. So what's like, I mean, are these things predatory? Are they legitimate? How do you navigate something like that?
So they could be both. It is really tricky. I would say for someone who is interested in taking part in a class action, it's helpful that's actually something really helpful to crowdsource, so asking other individuals who have been diagnosed who might be involved, what law firm did you go with? I think definitely making sure that they are a reputable law firm in their community. There's no complaints against them. So really doing your homework before signing up, because you want to make sure that you aren't falling victim to sort of these predatory ad-based things.
Yeah. And then the other one is malpractice. I know a lot of times guys will say, my urologist missed this for 3 months. How do you know if you have a leg to stand on?
Malpractice is a tricky one because very basically, and I will preface all of this with saying this is not my area of expertise. I am not a malpractice attorney. But typically you're going to have to show that you are worse off today than you would have been but for the actions of that provider. That is a very hard thing to prove for cancer. Because how can you prove that the tumor grew 3 inches when it wouldn't have grown 3 inches but for that decision, And so it just gets to be really hard to prove. All of that being said, there are absolutely cases of malpractice out there. That is why this exists as a field of law. And so if someone is interested in pursuing a malpractice claim against a provider, I would definitely recommend finding a lawyer that specializes in that area of the law. So this is not, you don't want to go to your neighbor tax attorney to file a malpractice suit. On triagecancer.org, we have a module about finding legal assistance that kind of breaks down what different types of lawyers do and then how you would go about finding one of that specialty.
Gotcha. All right, we'll leave it at that. In the last couple minutes, I want to ask you, we've talked about Triage Cancer, but give me the elevator pitch.
Sure. So Triage Cancer is a national nonprofit that provides education on all of the legal and practical issues that can arise after a cancer diagnosis. And we do that through educational events, materials, and resources. And so our goal is really to provide people with the information that they need so that they can make the right choices for them.
Great. Monica, Bryant, thank you so much for being on It Takes Balls.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
For more information and resources for your testicular cancer journey, visit testicularcancerawarenessfoundation.org.